allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and we'll move on to item number 3, and that is public comment. No one has approached me, and no one has approached the clerk, so we'll move on to item number 4, approval of the minutes of the March 25th, 2025 Executive Committee meeting, and the minutes were in your packet. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Marash and second by Supervisor Drabek. Any discussion on the minutes as presented? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion to approve the meeting minutes of March 25th of the Executive Committee signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried and is unanimous. Thank you. We'll move on to policy issue and potential committee determination, operational functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution, and/or policy, discussion and possible action by exec, and the possible action by exec to forward to the county board for approval would be a resolution in support of continuing the availability of tax-exempt bonding for municipalities. To give you a little bit of context, it would just attended the another WebEx that NACO has weekly now. They have this 100-day series that they are informing everyone on what is happening with the Trump administration and some of the executive orders and where we sit in budget negotiations for next year. One of the things that is unique, is unique about this year's potential process for the 2026 budget is a thing called reconciliation. And reconciliation is a process that's used. It eliminates the need for a 60-vote majority in the Senate to pass the budget. And so that process requires both houses to pass their potential budgets and budget guidelines. And just 2 hours ago, and the Senate had already passed last week their budget guidelines on the budget, and the House 2 hours ago passed their version of the budget guidelines. And now what will happen in earnest is there will be drafting of the proposed budget, but also and putting language to that. But they also then set, because they have set parameters on each of their potential bills, and those parameters spell out spending levels. So one of the things that they have done is the House, in passing its version, has really set the marker to increase debt by $2 trillion, but also extending the Tax Cuts Job Act legislation that was first passed back in 2017 under the first Trump administration, and making those Tax Cuts Job Act permanent. But they have a significant cost, and that cost is almost $3.7 trillion over a 10-year period. And so when the House passed their version of the guidelines, it would increase debt by effectively, depending on whose math you count, $2 trillion according to their definition, but it's also 3.7 because they've decided to make the Tax Cuts Job Act provision permanent. And then they start from a point of counting where the deficit is added from current authorization levels. So they don't, and because they don't expire until December of 2025, that $3.7 trillion cost is not counted in their math, but it is a significant increase in debt of $5.7 trillion. So what they have to do, or one of the things that the two houses, the House and the Senate, are looking at is potential revenue raisers. One of the revenue raisers that they're looking at is eliminating tax-exempt bonding that all municipalities utilize to pay for projects. A prime example would be Marathon County, roughly $80 million on the renovation of the campus down at North Central Healthcare. If they were to eliminate tax-exempt bonding, it would raise revenue by $364 billion. But it also would then pass that cost onto each municipality, the county being one, and so that would increase bonding costs roughly about 210 basis points or 2.1%. That cost, even though it generates a $364 billion revenue, does effectively cost municipalities, in essence, $820+ billion in cost, because there's not a dollar for dollar equal. It's not dollar for dollar equal. In other words, the dollar of revenue generated to the government is because the tax exemption no longer applies, and so that income is taxable to the bond holders. However, the cost is not dollar for dollar. Again, it would pass a cost of $6,554.67 of cost to each household in the United States. So that's why NACO is advocating to continue to allow tax-exempt bonding being utilized, so that we're not just shifting those costs to to the local municipalities and the local taxpayers. So that's just a little bit of the background, and so I thought because there is a all-out effort to try to preserve that ability for municipalities, for counties, for cities, for villages, for towns, I thought it would be important that we have that discussion here at the Executive Committee. So I'll open it up for a discussion, questions. And we have in the packet a proposed resolution that spells out some of that same information that I just shared with you. Vice Chair Dickinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't really think it's necessary to do a resolution, simply because I don't think it's something that's going to go away. This has happened in other administrations where they've threatened to do this, and it would take quite an effort, I think, for that to pass through Congress. So to me, it's just a matter of this kind of procedural thing where we're putting on a piece of paper to state this, and I just don't think it's necessary. Thank you.
Okay, other thoughts, other discussion? Supervisor Robinson, please.
I think this is one of those times where this does have a direct impact on potentially the county. I think it would be worthwhile for us to weigh in. Many times we'll pass resolutions for things that don't necessarily impact the operations of the county, but it could have a very significant one. And I think it just shows the importance of it to the county from a financing perspective, and the impact on the taxpayers. So I think it is important that we send that message.
I think the one thing that NACO is advocating for is not only, passing resolutions to pass resolutions, but to pass the resolution, but to continue to do follow-up with the resolution if the board is so inclined, and that is to follow up and say, what are those specific impacts that it would have on Marathon County taxpayers on projects that are currently funded with municipal bonds? In other words, if we had to borrow without the tax exemption for the renovation, what would that cost have been? Well, statistically, they say 210 basis points or 2.1% higher in borrowing costs. So that would mean the cost of bonding for that project would have been higher. So NACO's not just wants resolutions, but they want resolutions and follow-up with your federal delegation and explaining how these impacts, how the potential impacts would have. There is discussions at the Senate side of one of the concerns that the Senate has is some of the municipal bonding that has been utilized for the professional sports arenas, professional sports stadiums. And so there's also discussion about having a separate carve-out and saying those would no longer be exempt. So I think, I believe it's still worth, if so directed, to at least have that discussion with our local legislators. Supervisor Pfiffer, please.
I'll make a motion to approve the resolution in the packet.
Okay, a motion is there a second? Second by Supervisor Mask. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? The motion would be to approve the resolution and forward to the full board for its consideration. Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve the resolution in support of the continuation of the availability of tax-exempt bonding for municipalities signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed?
Aye.
Motion is carried but is not unanimous. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 7, educational presentation and committee discussion. Item number 7A, a legal update on closed session requirements under Wisconsin's open meetings law. And we have Corp Counsel Michael Pierner here to give us the latest if you weren't in some of the meetings that have already had some of those such issues.
Yes,
Michael, please.
A preview of coming attractions, for sure. So this update is based on a recent Court of Appeals case here in Wisconsin, and that Court of Appeals case is entitled Whitzinger versus the City of Marinette. Some of you may have heard about this. It involves the municipality of the City of Marinette being sued relative to an alleged open meetings violation, and the Court of Appeals ultimately agreed there was a violation. And what's really central to this case as far as how we operate and how we should operate moving forward is really how we present matters to justify going into closed session. This case made it pretty clear that how the courts, or at least this court, was going to interpret open meetings law is that it's not simply good enough to have the statutory language and repeat it on the record, but we actually need to give the committee or the board an opportunity to discuss the reasoning for going into closed session, to have an understanding of the justification, and to have that discussion before we vote on going into closed session. So that can be as simple as, in certain cases like the executive committee here, when we do our annual performance evaluation of the administrator, not to pick on the administrator, but it's an easy example. That's a closed session item where there's a specific statute that says you can go into closed session to do performance evaluations. That's a paraphrasing of the language. We would need simply to say, okay, our reason for going into closed session is we have an employee under our jurisdiction and we're conducting a review of that employee's performance. Where it's a little bit more complicated is when there's a legal basis, such as if you watched our joint infrastructure and HR finance meeting yesterday, when we're discussing collective bargaining or contract negotiation strategies in closed session. That's where really the litigation on closed session happens, because you have to really justify when you go into closed session for those reasons that there is no other way to have that discussion in open session and protect your bargaining interests. So if there is a way to have the discussion in open session without destroying the county's bargaining position, you have to do it in open session. And so to make a decision to go into closed session, you have to have enough information on the record to let people be able to decide, whether to go into closed session or not. Because ultimately, if you go into closed session and you weren't justified in going into closed session, then you have an open meetings violation, and we don't want to have that. So I put together a memorandum. I'm going to send it to all the chairs and vice chairs of all of our committees, commissions, boards, et cetera. I think I'm going to probably send it to the full board if you all think that's a good idea too. And it really just outlines the case and my advice, which really is make sure we have an opportunity to have that discussion before we make a motion to go into closed session. If we're struggling on how to have that discussion, let's consult about it before we have the meeting. And by consult, I mean give me a call and we'll talk through the legal process of how to do that. Obviously, we don't want to have a discussion that makes it moot to go into closed session because we already just disclosed everything we wanted to disclose in closed session, but we want to really have enough of a discussion that everyone's making an informed vote. So that line maybe is a little blurry, and that's why talking through it beforehand might be helpful. Yeah, that's really the advice and my update. I have a memo in a hard copy here. I can pass it out to people who are here, but I'll send it out in an email. But I wanted to give that update in person as well, and really just flag for everyone, if you see a closed session on your agenda, or if you plan to have a closed session, probably, at least for the first few, having a discussion on how we're going to do that is going to be helpful, because I'm still learning and analyzing how to best do that in certain circumstances. And in some cases, it'll be easier to do, and in some cases, it'll just take some thought ahead of time on how to really put that justification on the record.
I think that brings up a couple of points. Our rules do require, before we ever have closed session language put on an agenda that we're in charge of, that language is reviewed by Corp Counsel's office. So I just remind everybody, excuse me, in our board rules, it does require Corp Counsel's review of the closed session and ensure that we're in the we have the appropriate language listed in the appropriate statutes as far as closed session. The other thing I think it reminds us is that we need to keep, when we're in closed session, we need to keep the discussion germane to the reason that we're in closed session. Because it's sometimes very easy for committee members to stray off of the closed subject or closed session subject and get into other issues that are germane to the topic but are not germane to the reason for being in closed session. And so I implore each and every one of you, as you chair committees and chair your standing committees, that first off, if you got a closed session language, that it be reviewed by Corp Counsel prior to it, and also have that immediate discussion prior to a motion ever being made. And then secondly, or thirdly in this case, clearly understand that it's up to you as the chair to control when that closed session discussion gets out of hand. Vice Chair Dickinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one thought is the language within the agenda item itself, you are required to put in, some additional information already, like the to-wit. And the reason my understanding is that is similar to what we're saying here is, in our agendas, we have public comment, and it's not guaranteed you're going to go into closed session. And so it allows the public to come in and comment on that item to some general idea. So if you are doing an evaluation, it allows people to come into public comment and say, hey, Lance is great. You guys should give him, 50% raise and tickets to Hawaii and all that kind of stuff, and all department heads as well. But so there's a little bit of that. The other thing, though, is do those specifics then is an option to make the specifics longer? And then do you still have to have the discussion?
I think a little bit of a complicating factor in this particular case is they said to have this discussion in open session before someone makes the motion to go into closed session. that being said, I think having as much detail or specificity as you can get in that agenda language without obviously spilling the beans on what the closed session is. But first of all, you have to put the public on notice of what you're going to be discussing, regardless of whether you're going into closed or staying in open. So there has to be enough detail to glean from that, enough of your discussion so that the public knows generally what you're going to be talking about. If you have more detail in that agenda item, that also really sets the frame for that discussion before the motion is made. So I think it is a good idea to I guess, tighten up or elaborate on that language to make sure that that really sets the stage for that discussion to happen. And hopefully that's enough that there really doesn't have to be a significant discussion other than that's the reason that's set forth in the motion. So I make the motion, that type of thing. I think that makes sense, and I think if we beef that piece up, we'll be protecting ourselves from any issues as well. So I think that's a good idea.
Is there a possibility of having a separate line item on the agenda prior to the closed session motion that's written out? Discussion prior to going into closed session about the item, therefore reminding the chairs to discuss it prior to going into closed session.
I think there's definitely a way to do that. I think one way is to make it clear that there is an agenda item and then there's a possibility of a motion to go into closed
Okay.
session. I know in some cases previously, we've just agendized the motion to go into closed session. But that really is the option of the committee or the board. You could have an agenda item that says you might go into closed session, but decide you don't want to, or that you don't think it meets the level of meeting in closed session. So agendizing it so that there is an agenda item that's clear that you're going to be discussing, and then an option to go into closed session, that really keys it off to have that preliminary discussion before you get into the motion. That could be one way we maybe standardize that. I think it's worth thinking about.
Other Supervisor Drabeck, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So am I understanding this right, that you could like put a Y on the agenda, like why would be going into closed session? Am I following that? Talking all the lawyer stuff that you're saying, and
Yep.
I don't know if we should be discussing this in open session or not. No, just kidding.
Yes.
Thank you.
And we currently do, we have all the statutory language and then to wit, and then whatever the general basis is that we're going in, and to Vice Chair Dickinson's point, beefing up that to wit and explaining to a little bit more about why we're going into closed session can probably set the stage for that discussion and protect us from having one of these violations and court cases in the future. So I think that's a good idea.
Supervisor Frick, please.
Yeah, just thinking about this, I think there's two things that I think would be best practices. You know, including an item on there, discussion regarding reasoning for possibly going into closed session, and then beefing up that to it. I think those are two things that would put us in a better position. It'll be something I'll be looking to add to my agendas.
Supervisor Robinson, please.
Could I maybe ask or put a request in that when we have a closed session meeting, that Corp Counsel provide that background for consistency and compliance to ensure that we're addressing the needs arising out of that, so as similar to how we address the language in the agenda. I think it would be helpful if you could lay out from a legal perspective what those issues are at the start of the meeting.
And also so that we don't disclose any information that was the rationale for the closed session.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Administrator Leonard, please.
Yeah, sorry to put you on the spot, Mike. But that case, one other element that I thought was good, and maybe you can talk about it, was the idea that, one of the things that I think prompted the suit was they came out of closed session, no discussion, made a motion, and it moved forward. What guidance, if any, do we have for our committees when they come out to address that issue? Again, sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's that was the other piece of the case that is really important, and it really centered on this bargaining or contractual negotiations closed session exemption. And in that case, like I said before, you really need to be certain when you're going into closed session that there is no other way that you can have this discussion in open session, that you have to go into closed session to protect your bargaining position. In this particular case, there wasn't a discussion before going into closed session. There was a discussion in closed session that the public obviously wasn't able to participate in, and then there was a vote in open session, but no context or discussion behind that vote, which really completely takes away the public's ability to understand what's going on. I think one of the things that we benefit from in our committee system is being able to have a discussion at a committee level and at a board level. Typically, once an item that has been discussed in closed session at a committee level gets to the board level, there is going to have to be at least some discussion in open session. And that's really the important piece is when the board or a committee is going to be taking some formal action, that there has to be at least enough on the record to justify what that action was, even if it doesn't get into the specifics of how you arrived to that conclusion. I just think legal counsel, myself in the room, can prompt folks to maybe elaborate on the reasoning to Supervisor Robinson's point. In addition to setting out the basis for going in beforehand, if there is a need to make that prompt, I think we can keep our eyes out on that too. So, a really good point.
Other discussion, other questions? Okay, I think we've got, everybody is forewarned. We'll move on to item 7B, discussion on chapters 7 and 9 of the Marathon County Comprehensive Plan. And we have with us multiple people, but we have our CPZ Director, Lori Miskimmons. We have the North Central Regional Planning Director, Dennis Lawrence. We also have from North Central Regional Planning, Christian. And we also have from CPZ Planning, Jeff Pritchard. And I will turn it over to Lori, please.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. So we do have 2 chapters in your packet this month that we have in working draft format. So Chapter 7 on public safety and Chapter 9 on land use. Just a couple highlights we'll go over, and then we do have a couple questions to ask you on each chapter too to get input on. With Chapter 7 in the public safety, we worked with the Sheriff's Office and our Emergency Management Department to begin updating this, including having the Sheriff update their division information for the 5 divisions within their office, and also provide some additional information as it relates to the continuing challenges with the jail population and jail diversion programs and other programs they're working on through the Criminal Coordinating Council. The other thing we don't have in here yet is we are going to work to link to the life report, since the Sheriff's Office does routinely update their information through that Pulse and the life report. So we want to make sure that we put that in here, and we'll put some appropriate graphics or sampling of statistics and stuff from that within this chapter as well. Another thing to note, so emergency management did assist us in starting to update the emergency services within the county. And then we did also add on page 17 of the packet, or it's page 13 of the chapter 7, we added a section on the Regional Forensic Center, since that is something that's come in to the county since the last time we did the comp plan. And then we're also working to update vehicle and road safety data within the public safety chapter as well. Moving to the bottom of the chapter of chapter 7, when we get into the issues thus far that we're starting to develop for this chapter include the jail population, just that continued struggle to reduce the census within the jail, but also do so in a fashion that balances public safety and also allows timely processing of inmates. Another bullet issue that we've put in there, a placeholder for, is just the ongoing challenges with training and retention of the sheriff's office staff. The sheriff did note that the drug unit continues to have a high number of cases, so that continues to be an issue as it relates to public safety. And then the volunteer emergency services, we talked about this a little bit at the Public Safety Committee as well, that because we don't have consolidated emergency services at our local level, a lot of times these services are staffed by volunteers or even sometimes a lot older populations that are starting to age and not as able to volunteer anymore. So just continuing to have that struggle of how to keep those services going and what kind of training or things we should be working with the local communities on to be prepared for emergencies. As it relates to the goal, there's a bit of a typo here because again, this is a working draft, so we were working on it. But the goal, as it was stated in 2016, was Marathon County is a safe and secure community for all residents and visitors. What we were starting to workshop was pulling part of Objective 1 up into that goal that had to do with providing cost-effective and high-quality public safety services, but we didn't quite finish getting that goal developed. The objectives that we have been working on include promote coordination amongst public safety departments to identify efficiencies in reducing jail population, mitigate the impacts of the heroin and methamphetamine epidemics in Marathon County through evidence-based practices, promote efforts that reduce recidivism, improve road safety and design standards, and plan for and identify appropriate measures to be taken related to disaster mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. One of the things we've been talking about too as we go through these objectives is just that idea of thinking about what's the county's role. So, and when we are starting to develop those objectives, what's the county's role and what can we actually measure? So I'll stop on there with that chapter for a moment and open it up to comments and questions, and then we can go to the land use chapter.
We'll open it up for questions or comments by the committee. Any questions or comments on the public safety chapter and working copy? Supervisor Robinson, please.
So when I looked at this chapter, I was looking at, how is this looking 15, 20 years into the future? And some of the challenges that I saw that weren't addressed in there is we're using body cams and the cameras and the whole issue of storage of that data and how are we going to deal with it. The pressures associated with victim witnesses' rights within the court system. The problem that we have with accessing public defender services and the impact on the county's budget, both in terms of cost and the lack of available professionals in that area results in increased utilization of the jail. We really didn't talk much about the opioid issues and where we're going, and we have an opioid settlement that will go out several years. And then an issue that I'm concerned about is the whole issue of crisis services to support our law enforcement at the time of arrest. And I know it's something that we're working on a short-term basis, but I think it would be nice if we could look at, in 15 years, how would we want this to change? The final, I guess one other area is the whole issue of EMS. And we have the shortage of volunteers and critical needs going forward, but what might the county's role be? I would ask the public safety and perhaps health and human services to take a good look at those and looking out 15 years, what might we want that to look like if there is any difference in what might the county role be in doing that. This is a sort of a snapshot in time, but it's not that vision going forward, and I think those are critical issues for us as a county to begin to look at.
Yeah.
Okay. Supervisor Pfeffrick?
Yeah, in terms of the public safety, the first thing that comes to mind and what I somewhat struggled to figure out is what's the county role in this, but it's cooperation, consolidating services. It's getting harder and harder to find folks that want to participate in the paid on-call fire departments. It's harder and harder to recruit police officers, especially in, seems like in rural areas, it's been a struggle. But what role we can do to consolidate services, capital costs, fire trucks, police equipment in general continues to increase. If we can find ways that we can assist with our municipalities in consolidating services, if we can play a role in that, I think that's something that's absolutely necessary now and more so into the future.
Supervisor Mask, please.
We discussed that in 2022 already, and I think that it's because I had represented a rural district at that time, there's a little pushback because nobody wants to, it is the best idea they could do, it's the collaboration, pool their resources and money and have safety closer to them. But it's been ongoing for some time, and it's still something we need to look at, and it's really a good idea. And the biggest thing is getting them to cooperate, and I don't know if we can do that.
I think the one thing, though, that is clear, that is starting to show up even more so on your volunteer, fire departments, EMS systems, is the age of the volunteers that are actually active in volunteering continues to increase. And that's just going to continue to create additional challenges. Long-term response times is another thing. And so I don't disagree. I think we need to have some kind of, but you're 100% spot on, Supervisor Mask. I mean, some of the I don't want to say siloed approaches that some municipalities have. They want to protect what territory they have but I think from a global perspective from the county, we need to understand where the challenges are and where they're going to continue to be or where they're moving forward. Supervisor Mask, please.
One of the other things, too, is we have employers who don't cooperate. That don't give people a chance to have time off to go when they're on call. And I think that's something that needs to be looked at, too. And we did talk about this in public safety this week.
I think that's a change that's happened over time. I think when I look at my time when I was a volunteer fireman and a volunteer first responder, when I first got on back in the 80s, a lot of employers provided flexibility to your volunteer firemen to be able to leave their job if it wasn't, mission critical or a situation where they could fill in and provide additional time. But I think that that's changed to some extent. I don't know that, I think that there's still civic-minded employers out there. It's just a matter of they may not have the luxury of allowing employees off of an assembly line, for example, because it would shut down a whole line. Or in some cases, just doesn't allow employees to be able to leave their employment at a particular time to respond to those calls. Other comments? Supervisor Boots, you had a comment?
No.
Okay. Vice Chair Dickinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So under vehicle safety in that area, there is a community maps site that has crash data on it. So I noticed in here it mentions a life report, but maybe the community maps, I know it's something we talk about in infrastructure quite a bit, getting data from that. The second thing would be the road construction itself, rumble strips and those kinds of things aren't really listed in here, so I don't know if that's a section to be added as well about, the conditions of the road, et cetera. And then the other thing is, I know Mr. Griesbach talks often about distracted driving, especially through work zones and such, and distracted driving is such a thing. I don't see that in here, so maybe that's something that would be added as well. Thank you.
Supervisor Drabek, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Along the same lines of what Vice Chair Dickinson was talking about, I also a couple years ago, we passed something so UTVs could be driving on county roads, and I don't see anything in here on that either.
Okay, other discussion? Other discussion? Lori, please.
I'll go to
Sure.
chapter 9.
Yep.
Hang on here. Chapter 9 on land use. A couple things to highlight, some of the changes that we're making in there. If you go to, starting around page 27 of your packet, we're just starting to update some of the existing land use data and the equalized real estate value data. A couple of things we are considering bringing into the chapter for data include the CPZ Transact survey data, which I think some of you are aware, we've been collecting that on a regular basis for actually over 2 decades, where we are able to tell you a little bit more about 600 points within the county and how that land use has changed. So that was something we were talking about might be of value to bring some of that information into this chapter. We also have some additional data on the changes in farm characteristics and some of the patterns we're seeing with rezones with the county zone towns that we thought might be worth bringing in for data sources there. I'm going to ask Dennis to take us through the land demand conversation on page 29 of your packet in terms of what we might want to include as it relates to projections of growth for the county in the comp plan.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, basically, I mean, as most of you probably know, the Wisconsin Department of Administration produced population projections earlier this year. And we look at those projections, not only for Marathon County, but all 10 counties in the region we serve, all show declines over the next 30 years or so. So as we do kind of a lot of planning work, we also sort of produce I guess, an alternative option for looking at projections where we look at basically just the last 20 years of growth and just project that into the future. When we do that, we see growth in Marathon County as opposed to decline. So basically what we're going to be doing in this section is we'll identify what DOA provided. I mean, right, that's sort of official state projections as far as population. But that will also show an alternative that sort of helps us develop those land demands. I mean, if we show declining population, then it makes it pretty simple to do projections for land demand, right? I mean, that with the formulas, it shows all zeros, and I don't think that that's the case. And really, in terms of the alternative projections, looking at kind of that 20-year previous growth and into the future, if we look at kind of the benchmark of where we're at right now, Marathon County is already 5,000 population above where those projections would have put us. So I think that it makes some sense to use some projections that do show some growth in the county, and it's a pretty standard planning technique as an option anyway. And the future might fall somewhere in the middle, but I think that we want to at least identify, overall growth, and as we look at the county, about a 1% increase is not a false thought in terms of what we might see. And I think if we look at the history, that's been pretty consistent. So that's really what we're going to be doing there. That's why you see blanks in those tables there. We just wanted one to make sure that the committee was sort of clear as to what we were doing, and then just kind of have some conversation related to that.
Open it up for discussion. Or Lori, you got additional? You want to,
Yeah, we can pause there and talk about that, and then I can go through the rest of it, so.
Supervisor Pfiffer, please.
Yeah, in terms of what Mr. Lawrence said, I think absolutely including something from North Central Regional Planning. In my opinion, the DOA projections, just the timing of everything that took place, I think there's not the greatest data in that set. In terms of the land demand, one thing to think about and potentially include in there too is specifically to residential, we're seeing smaller household size. So even if our population were to stay stagnant or increase slightly, we still need more land because we have smaller household size. So that's one of the big questions we get asked often is, well, if our population's staying stagnant, why do we need more houses? How can we be short on houses in the area? And that's one of the main reasons why.
I think that's quite, when you look at the average household size, it has been declining for the last several years. And that's really one of the pressures. And then on top of that, with an aging population, but we also have systems that we've tried to implement throughout that allow more elderly to be able to stay in their homes longer. And so that has contributed to the additional demand for additional housing. Other discussion? Supervisor Robinson?
I'm not sure if this is the right time, but I'll throw it out there anyway. And again, looking ahead, well, a couple things relative to agriculture. I think farms are getting bigger or smaller. And I think the shift to organic farming should be highlighted in here, and the whole issues that, while the CAFOs are there, we also have that small, and particularly on the western side of the county, organic farming community and development. And when we talk about land use, I know that it's, you know, is it zoning, is it other things? But when we talk about land use, I think of the Fenwood Creek discussion relative to surface water quality and the impacts on the Big Old Plain. And should we be looking at land use and practices and what the county's role would be? And I know that Chair Lonahan has done a good job of trying to articulate some of the pressures associated with upstream land uses and their impacts down on BOD and other things. But is there an opportunity for us to discuss potentially the county's role in trying to address some of those surface water quality issues, and even to a degree sometimes the groundwater issues? And I'm not sure if this is the chapter to do it, but I think somewhere we should have that discussion about how land uses impacts other chapters or parts of the plan.
Okay, other discussion? Lori, please
A
continue.
couple more comments on the chapter 2 on some of the other changes. Really quickly, in the zoning regulations, we do want to expand to add some information about metallic mining and wind and solar regulations, since those sections of our code have grown since 2016. And then also, as you get into the issues, the issues definitely that we focused on in the working draft thus far are just managing growth to try and preserve rural character and allow for bringing in more housing supply, but also with that consideration for how do we protect our most prime soils and keep our farmland productive, since there continues to be a lot of pressures for farming in this county. So I think to Supervisor Robinson's point too, I think we're looking at amongst all the chapters where some of the issues should land or go. Does it go in water quality? Does it go in land use? Or how do we tie them together? I think there's also some overlap with the community character chapter that we'll have to work out too, as we talk about the issues and what data goes where. The land use goals and objectives, right now we have that the land use goal would be Marathon County makes sound land use decisions which balance the needs of agriculture, recreation, economic development, and growth to wisely maximize the land's potential. And the objectives that we have in the draft right now include promote the preservation of agricultural land, promote practices that preserve soil health and land productivity, encourage revitalization of former residential properties in rural areas, and provide tools for managing and coordinating growth.
Okay, any additional feedback on that portion of the section, or any other comments? Supervisor Mass, please.
I neglected to mention something when we were talking about public safety, and when John started talking about smaller farms and organic farms, and there's also grazing farms that are not as big as the CAFOs. And it's child safety on farms. I had given it to Lori yesterday, so I don't know if it fits into public safety and health and human services, but I think public safety is one of it, and education is part of it. And you have kids that have fallen into manure pits and different things like that, fall off tractors. We can't do it in the communities that are very closed. They don't even relate the details of incidents or accidents to the police when they're being investigated. Is what they tell the police, that's what happened. And there's no way they can prove anything else unless there's a super investigation. But the National Farm Safety Agency in Marshfield, Barbara Lee, she's put out a paper, and I don't have my copy with me today. I didn't think to bring it, brought everything else. But I think it's something we could look into also, if we could put that in somewhere. because there's a lot of kids, not all families live on the farms they own, but there's workers who are on the farms and they have kids sometimes. So I think child safety on farms is really important, and I think we should really look into something like that too. Thanks.
Vice Chair Dickinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So along those same lines, when he's looking at the land use goal, a word that's not in there is health. So we're looking at agriculture, recreation, et cetera, but putting health in there might be a good thing. Thank you.
Other discussion? Supervisor Shefrick, please.
Yeah, with the goals, one of the things I see is number 3, objectives encouraging revitalization of former residential properties in rural areas. I think that's just as pivotal in urban areas, especially when we look at our first goal of preserving agriculture. Looking at infill, there's it's not really a new movement, but I think it's called Smart Cities Initiative or certification. You have some areas of developed urban cities, villages, that may be zoned that the new zoning that's in place now doesn't allow building on a certain lot of certain size. So finding ways that we're maximizing those areas that we expect to have some density is going to be beneficial in the long run for saving and preserving our agricultural lands.
Other discussion? Other discussion? All right, very good. Thank you. We'll move on to item 7C, 2024 Strategic Plan Review and updates. 12.3, strategic strategies and outcome measures for joint facilities, 911, consolidated public services, solid waste, online presence, and employee retention and resignation rates for administration department, for the administration department. Oh, Vice Chair Dickinson, please.
Thank you,
Sorry
Mr.
about
Chair.
that.
So I've gone to many of the committees, missed 2 yesterday, infrastructure and HR finance. Gentlemen, we'll get that taken care of. So just the brief intro on that. So we just heard about the new comprehensive plan. New comprehensive plan will lead to a new strategic plan. This discussion is merely about the current strategic plan, which was started in 2018 and then revised in 2023 and extended. So this is just about putting a bow on this objective, the one that we have for the executive committee, the one outcome measure. The additional strategies in there can be discussed. It doesn't have to be significant data on that. But really, it's just kind of having that final discussion with the executive committee over this current strategic plan.
Lance, you had some additional information on employee retention rates and
Sure.
resignation rates?
Sure. As Vice Chair Dickinson referenced, we've been to another number of committees, and one of the areas that the Vice Chair asked staff to provide as much information as was readily available to us is on the outcome measure side. So for a lot of the outcome measures, we have used things like Marathon County Pulse or other data sources. With respect to Objective 12.3, which is the objective that the executive committee was identified as the lead committee with respect to that objective, there is one outcome measure that is identified. My recollection was as part of the plan from 2018, there were a number of objectives that were ultimately accomplished, but this one remained, and that was to reduce to and maintain a county employee resignation turnover rate of 15% or lower by December 31st, 2024. And you'll recall, it kind of goes to very much in line with the conversation you've recently had around just earlier today with respect to EMS services and some of the public safety services. But it's certainly not unique to Marathon County or those services. I mean, it's something we see across certainly at our Extension Education Economic Development Committee. We talk about, workforce is a driving factor for a great many things. So with respect to our county employee resignation turnover rate, I can give you the last 3 years, 2022, 23, 24. This information is going to be, I say frequently, our data is accurate, but perhaps not precise. Head count is different than FTE, but you can't separate with a portion of a person. When someone resigns, it's a 1.0 resignation, but in terms, they might be leaving a position that was a 0.75 is my example. So all that aside, in 2022, our turnover rate was 18.6. In '23, that dropped to 11.5. In '24, we were at 13.2. And in 2025, we're on pace for about 13.4. So you might rightfully ask, well, what does that mean? And I think that's an area of opportunity for us to identify how does that benchmark against other organizations, and we can start to look at that. But a couple of things are clear. When I met with our HR director this morning, she pulled some data for me yesterday, but what is very clear, and this I don't think is any surprise, we're not unique compared to other organizations, but what we have seen is a workforce where the tenure of our staff has significantly decreased over the last several years. And I'm just going to pull up a couple of slides to show that, or a couple of resources. All these are from the Wisconsin Policy Forum, and they're a little bit dated. You can see this report here on the right. Is the title of the report is Public Sector Workforce Takes a Hit. It's a report from August of 2022. But what it shows in the figure 2 there is the amount of experience that individuals have or their tenure within the Wisconsin retirement system. So this is broader than, of course, Marathon County. It's all those individuals within the retirement system. But you see since 2010, kind of a drop, and this is through 2021, and that has certainly continued. The number of staff with more than 10 years of experience in the WRS and the Wisconsin retirement system dropped to 44.8%. That, I have no doubt, has continued. I'll tell you, I pulled our data, and our percentage of county employees with 10 or more years of experience in their county position is 32%. Similarly, or conversely, I should say, the number of staff, the makeup of our employee body with less than 5 years of experience has grown. So looking at 2022, we were at 53%. We went up to 55% by the end of 24. So that's stable, but I think that shows you that's again, I met with Molly this morning just to talk through some of what do those things mean. And we actually, similarly, when we look at the turnover within our, I'm sorry, I stated that differently. I want to say we have if you have less than 5%, less than 5 years of experience, it's 44% of our workforce right now. But we really have seen a lot of individuals with less than 5 years of experience turnover. That was my point, which isn't surprising to me when I speak with my colleagues, and I was speaking with Molly. I think we see it just in our daily lives. It seems as though employment is more transactional than perhaps it's been historically. People do make job changes a lot more promptly. So that's the 53% in 2022. 2023, it was 53%. In 2024, we ended the year at 55%. That's the turnover rate for staff within those lower experience levels. So drilling into why is that happening, I think part of that is environmental, like I alluded to. Work is more transactional, but certainly it's an opportunity for us to say, why do we have a higher turnover rate with respect to some of our less tenured positions? And I think that's an area for us to drill into. As the vice chair said, we're kind of putting a bow on this strategic plan. But when we look at what I think are some goals, and certainly they're going to be goals for administration and our departments, regardless of whether they're identified in the strategic plan, but I want to know more about why. We have employee exit interviews that we can look into, and of course, it's going to be the same things that you might expect in speaking with Molly, hey, people are leaving for higher pay to go elsewhere. That's pretty common. But even if there's not much we can do in terms of how to stem that tide or perhaps turn the curve to keep those people longer, if that's just the way the workforce is going to be, we need to change how we do things. And I do think there's some of that. So, again, I just met with HR staff this morning to talk about things like onboarding and training and how we're going to make some changes. But that was eye-opening to me. I think we're doing pretty well when you look at turnover compared to kind of in the government sector. I just pulled, again, this is a dated report, but it's from, again, the Wisconsin Policy Forum, and it's specific to schools, but you can see this graph when you get to the end of 2023, employee turnover around that 16%, 15-16% mark. I think we're doing better than that. Not a whole lot better, but I don't believe we're out of the norm in terms of that turnover rate. But I do want to drill more into what does that mean, that tenure analysis, and how can we ensure that when we bring staff in, if we can reasonably only expect that, we're going to expect half of our employee population to turn over relatively quickly. How do we make sure we can be as effective as we can with that kind of new just fact of employment? I'm not resigned to the fact that that's a fact of employment, but want to learn more. So as is often the case with with data, it doesn't so much provide answers as prompt more questions. But wanted to provide that update that, hey, we're meeting the objective or the outcome measure, but it begs more questions.
I guess two thoughts are there that, when we start comparing ourselves, comparing ourselves to the public sector versus comparing ourselves to the private sector, do we even know, is the private sector realizing some of these same turnover rates, and is it because of the economy? And it, that would be, also an interesting factor if the private sector is seeing, obviously the private sector in some cases can be reactionary quicker in that they can increase, salaries based on the increased cost of their widgets that they're selling if it's manufacturing, and they can be more responsive to the workforce to some extent. But at the same token, so I guess the interesting question would be, how do we compare to the private sector versus how do we compare to the public sector? And when we start comparing public sector to public sector, are we comparing same industries? Meaning, I know that one of the graphs you brought up was comparing public sector to the teaching industry. I think there's different forces at play there than versus the public sector in government.
I think those are good questions. The other thing, kind of along the lines of your point, we're going to dive into our individual departments to see where we have higher turnover. I know at public safety, for example, the last several years, we've made a real effort to ensure that we address what was a high vacancy rate within our corrections division. And we made some changes, but that is an area where there's kind of that, my sense is there had been frequent turnover on the less tenured side of that team. But departments aren't all equal either. Right. That said, my small department, we're onboarding a new person this week. Her first day was Monday. I'm very excited about that. She's doing great. But how can we one of the strategies that I talked with our HR department about this morning is making sure that onboarding and training is as strong as it can be, because if we're going to have that, we want people to feel connected right away to their team, see how their work really matters, because I think that's one of the things we do have that I think we do a good job when we do our new employee orientation, I do it in this room, and trying to link the work that we do and how we serve the public, our neighbor, our family members, friends and neighbors, and the vision of being the healthiest, safest, and most prosperous county. But I think there's clearly some opportunities to learn more, and I think comparing to the private sector is certainly something we can look at.
Other discussion? Supervisor Frick, please.
I think there's a lot of good things that Lance, you mentioned there, and I think overall, in my perspective, I think the county's doing pretty good based on some of the numbers you shared. I think a couple things factoring into this first is just age demographics, population, workforce at that age is retiring. The pandemic was really a big inflection point on a lot of different factors. From data and my personal experience, I would say that there was a bit of a stagnation in compensation for a lot of employees. And that pandemic accelerated that. And a lot of people saw that if they took a new job, they were going to see a significant increase in their compensation and benefits for that matter, where an existing employer wasn't so eager to give them a raise, where if they went to a new employer, they would see those benefits. So I think it'll be really interesting. And I think some of the data you shared really shows that has slowed down in the last few years, and from what I've seen as well. Thank you.
Other discussion? All right. Great conversation. Look forward to more. Next meeting date and time, our next meeting is scheduled for May 8th, 2025, 3 o'clock. Committee members are asked to bring in future agenda items and discussions to me, and we're down to item number 9. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Marash. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Arstead to adjourn. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried, and we stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. Both of them, yeah.
And Boots was definitely in favor of it, I can tell.
With the extra pay, we can just fly us out.
Sent him a message, I said that was very Maynard Trammell.
Yeah.
God rest his soul. Maynard, did you have something? Yeah. Go Pack, go. Still the greater.
Where are the donuts?
No, it was really good. Can I steal both of you for just a minute?
Yeah.
It's like,
Stacy and Jennifer?
yes, please.
Oh, you don't?